Today, you're going to win some games just by memorizing some of FunMasterMike's favorite opening traps. We don't do openings too often on ChessKid, so I'm pretty eager to show you these tricks today. Now, we're going to start from the beginning for each of these traps so that you can see how they unfold. The first one is if you're black and your opponent plays the move pawn to d4. We don't talk about d4 too much either, but I like to play d5. And if your opponent plays the Queen's Gambit, the most solid way of dealing with it is to defend your pawn. e6 and c6 are both playable, but let's play c6. We call this the Slav Defense. And if your opponent attacks that pawn on d5, you're going to defend it again. Now, here is the beginning of the trap. White can play a solid move like e3 or knight f3, but if your opponent plays bishop to g5, you're going to break one of my opening rules. You're going to move a piece twice in the opening. The trap begins with knight to e4, and the knight is already targeting the bishop. Pretty much everybody here captures the knight, because if you guard your bishop, I can do tricks like take, and I can play e5, discover attack on your knight and getting very good control of the center. For example, when your knight moves back, I'll kick your knight again, and if your knight moves, guess what? You do have my permission to push your f-pawn. After pawn f6, you are trapping the knight. That's actually not the main trap. If we go back, as I mentioned, in this position, most players are actually going to take your knight because it is so strong. And after takes and takes, I have a funny story about this position. I have shown it to probably 20 or more pretty strong chess kids, and all 20 have suggested the same move for white. Because white can't put the knight on the happy square, all 20 students have suggested e3 to help the bishop get out. Guess what? That's the losing move. That's the exact move we want white to play. Because loose pieces drop off, we always look at our checks and captures, put everything together, bang, queen a5 check, and black wins the bishop because this sneaky queen, she traveled to the right, but she attacked back to the left. And the funny thing is, if white had just not played e3, if that pawn could be put back here, which I can't really do, I'm just going to hold it there, then white could play either bishop d2 or queen d2 and be perfectly fine. But because the pawn is on e3, that's not possible. Black wins the bishop and probably the game. This next trap, I'll be honest with you, it's one that I personally have to avoid more than I get to do on my opponent. And why is that? Well, it's because it's when black plays the Pirc or the modern, and white plays d4. And in this position, I'm going to make a couple of moves. If anybody's watched FunMasterMike's live shows, you've seen me play this a lot as black. But in this position, in any version of the Pirc or the modern, black has to be really careful about playing the move knight on b to d7 before castling, because it blocks in this bishop, which means less control of e6, which means white gets to play a heroic move. Bang! Bishop takes f7. Always look at checks and captures, kids. And after king takes, knight to g5, and because of the weakness of e6, this trap works. Now, if your king moves here, knight e6 traps the queen. That's bad. If the king moves to f8, knight e6 forks the king and queen. That's still pretty bad. So black has to play king to g8 just to survive, but now after knight e6, the queen only has one move, and the knight takes on c7, winning the rook. And in this position, even if the knight gets trapped, white already has a rook and two pawns for the knight. And in fact, if black plays b6 to get the bishop to b7, white can get a third pawn. A rook and three pawns is much better than two minor pieces. In fact, white might even play something tricky like queen e2, and then queen check, and then try to sneak the knight out to c7. But again, even if the knight sacrifices, white is much better. So be very careful as black, playing knight to d7 before castling. Some of those tricks on f7, they'll come back to get you. I know I've lost a few games in that exact way. Moving on to the opening that I played the most as a kid, which is the Scotch Gambit. The Scotch Gambit is d4, but you don't take the pawn back and you play bishop c4. Now, one line for black is knight f6, and after castles, knight takes e4. I actually have a recent YouTube video about some of this stuff. Now, black is actually okay, but black often falls into a trap. Let's take a look at the trap. Now, after rook to e1, black can play d5, and white has this surprising move, bishop takes. Now, black has not done anything wrong yet. After queen takes knight c3, this pawn is pinned, this knight is pinned, but remember white sacrificed a piece to get this position. Black usually hides the queen on a5, and after knight takes, well, there is a little trap that black could fall into. If for some reason black does not block the e-file, if black, let's say, I don't know, allows you to play a double check, you will. I mean, really, any move that allows you to play this check or this check is going to be really bad. In fact, there could often be even a double checkmate. So, for example, bishop f5, knight f6 is double check, and after the king moves over, we have ourselves an Arabian mate. Now, I think it's pretty unlikely that that trap will work. Most strong players play bishop e6. They know to block off the e-file, but I've got another trap for you. Knight on e to g5, and now black should just give the pawn back. Black is actually ahead of pawn, and if black castles queenside and allows you to take, and play rook takes, the game is about equal. But often kids like to hang on to every drop of material. They don't like anything taken out of their piggy bank. And they play queen to d5, but here's the trick. Knight takes f7. The bishop is pinned, the king must take, and then after knight to g5 check, you're winning your piece back. You got your pawn back on f7, the black king can't castle. Let's say it goes to e8, knight takes e6, and white is completely crushing. White's not down any material, and white is threatening maybe the most fantastic move in chess, a family fork that is also double check, a royal family fork double, I don't even know what to call it. Knight takes c7, and even if that doesn't happen, white is clearly better because black can never castle. Moving on. This is going to be a crazy one, chess kids, but I had a friend growing up who loved to play g4 against me, at least in some fun blitz games. This is called the Grob Opening, but I would not want my name on this opening. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to play d5, and what white usually does is play bishop to g2, and white is supposedly tricking you into taking, and then playing c4, and after possibly queen b3, getting a tremendous attack on d5 and b7. But guess what? We're going to fall into this trap, so to speak. We're going to let white play this, but we're going to play an amazing move. Instead of taking the pawn or guarding the pawn, we're going to push. Now, has FunMasterMike lost his mind? Does he need to be fired as a chess coach? I'm allowing bishop takes b7, but wait. After knight to d7, takes, we've only sacrificed the exchange, and we are turning the tables. I can barely even draw an arrow that long, but this rook is in supreme danger. Now, white could technically survive by playing f3, but black still has a great game by just playing the move e5 or knight f6, getting pieces out. The pawn is pinned, and white's position is horrible. However, if white plays the move knight f3, now you're going to see why FunMaster pushed this pawn instead of capturing. We're going to what we call undermine the defense. We're going to play pawn to d3. We're going to tickle this pawn, and now white cannot save the knight because we are destroying that pawn on the next turn. Either he takes us or we take him, doesn't matter. And then after that happens, we totally win this knight, and black is completely crushed. And this is over. It is over. Black wins this game. Pretty cool trick. So you might not face g4 that often, but if you've got a friend like I have that likes to play it, now you know what to do. Our final example is our longest one, but I'm here to tell you I used this opening to beat an 1800 as a little kid. I was 7 or 8 years old, and I actually copied my coach's advice perfectly to win a game. Just goes to show you, sometimes if you can memorize opening traps, you can win entire games by just listening to your coach. Who's your coach? Is it FunMaster? Oh, maybe. Okay, well, let's take a look here. So after e4, we're going to learn what to do against the Caro-Kann. Knight c3, d5, knight f3. And if your opponent takes and takes, black's actually doing okay in this position. Black has a couple of different knight moves that are all right. But if black plays bishop f5, here comes the beginning of the trap. You're going to play knight g3. Now, the bishop could go to g4, but if that happens, you'll just play the no parking sign, and you're probably going to end up with the bishop pair. So the bishop usually goes back to g6, and now full speed ahead, h4, planning to trap the bishop. Now, when black plays h6 to give the bishop room, we go after the bishop, and then when it hides, we develop our queen. We're already way ahead in development because that black bishop has moved a ton of times. We're threatening mate. By the way, black better not play queen d5 to guard the mate because bang! Bishop c4, and we have an unstoppable attack. That's game over right there. So black could play the move g6, And I'm actually here to tell you, you have several winning moves. One idea is to play queen f3, threatening mate on f7. And if the knight moves, then your queen swings all the way over to b3. What a crazy queen. She starts out on the right, she ends up on the left, but she reintroduces the checkmate threat, and she also threatens the pawn on b7. That's one way to win, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is to ignore the attack on the queen and play bishop c4. Now, of course, if the pawn takes, that's one trap, right? Bishop takes f7, and oh, it's so pretty. When you can give away your queen and checkmate with a bishop and knight, that's pretty cool stuff. Now, we're going to assume our opponent stops that by playing e6. And now a funny little move. We have to save our queen, but if you go directly for mate on f7, the knight will just block. You'll be helping black. So we're going to instead put our queen on e2. And the funny thing is, in this position, after almost any reasonable developing move, like bishop here, or knight here, or other various moves like knight here, against any of those moves, we're going to play the same trick. Knight f6, here's the trick. Bang! Knight takes f7. You could say we are undermining this pawn. We just learned that word. And after king takes, queen takes e6, king g7, and it's mate on f7. I won in the game in this exact way against a very strong player, and hopefully you're going to be able to win some games soon using these traps. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you give credit to FunMaster when you win your next game with an opening trap.